Today I'm talking to Mykola Kapitonenko, who is an associate professor at Kyiv Shevchenko National University, and he is now currently in Kyiv and has agreed to speak to us about the current situation in Ukraine and the war that has been already going on for over 2 weeks, actually. Mykola, so without further ado, if you can just shortly describe the situation where you are, what the moods are, what the recent developments are, how do you feel?
Now, after more than 2 weeks of fighting, people are generally getting used to it, if I can put it like this. And the whole society, the economy, the political system is being switched to a military mode. So mostly we expect a protracted conflict, a long-lasting fight with heavy losses. Certainly already they have been inflicted upon Ukraine, but are surely to rise. So general mood is resolute, I would say, and the situation is fundamentally different from what happened back in 2014, let's say, when there was a complete disorientation, disintegration of political system and state as a whole. Now it is different, and I think this is the most important miscalculation among many others, which enabled Putin's absolutely wrong decision to invade.
So we have seen that there has been several rounds of negotiations or meetings between high-level officials from the Ukrainian and from the Russian side. What do we know about these negotiations? What is your assessment? Is there any progress?
They're tough. Today there was a fourth round, which started actually today and I think will resume tomorrow. This is a preliminary stage, in my view, because the political demands, which have been set by Russia in the beginning, are extremely high. And as long as the military campaign is not going according to their scenario, many people in Ukraine are expecting that actually Ukraine should put forward these demands and Russia should meet them. So far there is no, in my view, or very narrow zone of possible agreement. And not only on a political level, but also on a technical level. Mostly what they managed to achieve are agreements over humanitarian corridors, about some humanitarian relief, but even these negotiated results are very often in danger. So places where the situation is the worst, like around Mariupol, they are still in danger, and these agreements are not just working. So I assume that the talks will be continued because on the one hand, Ukraine is suffering due to military activities and due to losses of lives and infrastructure and so forth. And on the other hand, Russia is also paying a heavy price for invasion. So I guess that slowly the positions are getting to some compromise, but I think that it will still take some time more.
So are you of the opinion that further damage needs to be inflicted, sort of, so there is more willingness to actually arrive at some agreement?
Unfortunately, I believe so. And I think that this is mostly Russia, which has to suffer more in order to understand that provisional demands are unrealistic and they cannot be met. How long it takes depends on many factors, including international pressure and internal political situation in Russia, which probably we don't know about pretty much. But a variety of factors at some point should pressure Putin into some sort of agreement, I guess.
So Russia named among its preconditions, as they see them now, they named the recognition of Crimea as part of Russia, recognition of Luhansk and Donetsk as independent republics, and demilitarization of Ukraine and plus denazification of Ukraine, which no one knows exactly what it means, but basically more recently they seem to have dropped it. What do you say? How does Ukraine see these preconditions, and what it would realistically be willing to, agree to, or what concessions would it be willing to make, and what should Russians drop, which is absolutely no go for Ukraine?
Several days ago, the demands have been softened significantly, and as far as I understand, the recognition of the annexation of Crimea, the recognition of the independence of the DNR-LNR, and neutrality of Ukraine have been three major demands. They still are pretty difficult to meet, and I think that much more realistic is negotiations around Ukraine's neutral status only in connection with effective security guarantees. This is something which can be talked about. And I also think that issues of Crimea and the so-called DNR-LNR are better postponed with the promise of both sides not to resolve this issue by force. So this is kind of a freezing of a conflict, in a certain way a return to a status quo before the war. But this sounds much more realistic, and I think this is what provides Putin with a safe facing option, since very much has been focused on the threats by NATO expansion and by possible Ukraine's joining. This could be discussed, but once again, Russia has to certainly to withdraw, to stop the war and to withdraw its forces, and also to fully engage into compensations, discussing of compensations and security guarantees for Ukraine in return.
So if Russia provides security guarantees, what can make them effective? What can make Ukrainians believe that they would actually keep up their word?
I guess nothing after what happened. Mostly Ukraine would be facing a difficult task of providing the security for itself, which will be the center of all efforts taken after the war. But what is important, in my view, is that the invasion of Russia into Ukraine has completely changed the world we are living in. Many things which have been absolutely unthinkable before February 24th are now pretty possible. It includes the scope of the sanctions and the reaction by the West and the level of support Ukraine currently enjoys of the Western support. And still, as long as the world has completely changed, I think that many things which have been unthinkable are becoming realistic. And for instance, I think that a part of a deal may be a membership of Ukraine in the EU. This will provide those security guarantees which Ukraine is looking for outside NATO. Probably they will not be so strong as if Ukraine were the NATO member state, but there still will be some sort of guarantees. And providing Ukraine with EU membership as a broader deal in exchange for neutrality or non-membership in the NATO could also be a resolution to this situation. I see and I know that some European states are hesitating. Some are still perceiving the situation from the perspective of a month ago, when it is too slow, demands time, reforms, bureaucracy is ruling, and so on and so forth. But this is a completely different situation today. And Europeans should be aware of the fact that, okay, they can postpone the decision. They can block Ukraine's move towards the EU membership. But the price will be paid not only by Ukrainians, because Europeans are already paying the price with refugees, with economic crisis, with social and humanitarian crises. So there is a completely new framework for decision making. because of that, I think that this maybe in a way compensate for the lack of trust because of which any security guarantees in Russia will not work effectively.
So many in the West were actually taken aback by Russia's intervention. And was it anticipated in Kyiv? Because President Zelensky was also saying till the very start of the war that it's not actually going to happen, and then it did. So was it absolutely an unexpected move by Russia, or how do you assess that?
I think for me personally, it was an unexpected move. Absolutely, it was a total surprise. Just because I believe in rationality, and I am sure that an invasion into a sovereign, independent country in the middle of Europe in 2022 is a disastrous move. It is there is an extremely high price in all dimensions. And there is no possible win for Russia in this situation. Because of that, I suggested that decision makers in Moscow have been also rational, and that they will, even if they apply military force, they probably would limit it to the Donbass. And I think that the majority of experts in Ukraine and politicians in Ukraine believed many in the same thing. But certainly, unlike experts, political leaders have to be ready for different scenarios. And I think that although Zelensky and other top officials in Ukraine were saying that Russia is not likely to invade, but they were getting prepared for this. And this is one of the reasons why Russia's plans for a rapid, successful end to this war are not working the way they hoped. Ukraine is resisting, also including also because of the preparations which were made on the very eve of the invasion, but also beforehand. So I think that either very few people believed it's possible, but they still kept in mind this worst case scenario.
In your recent article for the National Interest, you actually wrote that the war in Ukraine will make the West more united but less powerful. What do you mean by that? And what does this situation mean for the West? And what does it mean for Ukraine? And what does it mean for other countries, so-called in-between countries, like Georgia or Moldova?
This is a test for everyone. And if Russia wins in any meaningful sense of the word, in whatever they think may be a victory here, I mean, if they impose the conditions they like upon Ukraine, the international order will change fundamentally. And we now see that the West is becoming more united in the response. They take a Russian threat more seriously, and they take it as something fundamental for European security, which has been absent before. This is what I mostly imply by West become more united. American leadership is being restored. But if Russia wins, that would mean that instruments that the West relies on, like sanctions, like economic dominance, like financial institutions, like international institutions generally, are not working properly. They will be that would mean that these institutions, which have been traditionally supporting the existing international order, are not working anymore. And that would mean fundamental changes for countries like China, first of all, not even Russia. So in that sense, the result of this war is decisive not only for Ukraine, certainly. China is very interesting here because many people think that China is actually standing behind Russia and is interested in Russia's success. But I have my doubts since for China, this is not so simple. They do have special relations with Russia, and they also want to change international order like Russia wants. But as long as this conflict continues, the West is becoming more consolidated, and this is not in the interest of China. What is more, since this is a war against an independent country, a sovereign country which unprovoked war, then China, by not taking sides or by carrying out an ambiguous policy towards this, its own role under the new world order. Because if China is a global player and the responsible global player, it carry on some principles, and the principle of respecting territorial integrity and sovereignty of other states is fundamental for One Belt, One Road initiative and for overall grand strategy of China. So by playing on Russia's side or by playing on no one's side, China is undermining its long-term strategic goals. That's why I think it will be very interesting to follow the developments of the Chinese approach to this issue.
Do you expect them to engage somehow more actively as a potential mediator, or?
I think they should. I think they should, first of all, distance themselves from Russia. They should also send signs that they are not happy about what is happening in Ukraine. And they already did it by sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine. And they also should offer more probabilities or more efforts from their side as mediators at a certain point. Probably they are not ready so far, but they might be ready in the nearest future.
In the West, in NATO countries, there was also this debate about establishing a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Do you think it's a good idea, bad idea? Is it something that should be desired?
I do understand that it is difficult. Once again, getting back to the way we used to think about international politics 3 weeks ago, this would be certainly impossible, because this would dramatically increase the probability of a direct war between NATO and Russia. Something which rational decision makers in the West will not accept. But as I have mentioned, the world has changed, and probably providing a non-fly zone over Ukraine is even more difficult decision than giving Ukraine an EU membership. And I don't think that is easy. Probably it's technically impossible to do. But the West at the same time should understand that once again, if Ukraine fails and if Russia wins, then every European country would face a bigger threat, which probably it will not be enough to meet with increased military budgets, for instance, like in Germany. It will take some time before European armies would become stronger. Probably supporting Ukraine today by some extraordinary means, which seemed absolutely unrealistic, would be a better decision than paying much more for their own security and taking higher risks after Ukraine is overcome by Russia. Still, it's an open question, and it's a matter of pressure by Ukrainians on the governments of the European countries, appealing to the public opinion and sending signals about, okay, if not a non-fly zone, then take any other steps which could make Ukraine more resilient to the Russian invasion. So to sum up, I think that this is still a very low chance of this being done, but this should be debated, this should be discussed, and this should be kept on the surface of the agenda, as well as any other measures which can make Ukraine's resistance stronger.
Thank you. Let me ask you a couple of questions about the reporting on this conflict. So from the West, when you read Western media, there is, first of all, a lot of praise to Ukraine and a lot of praise and respect to President Zelensky. Can you reflect on that, on his role in this conflict and his decisions that he's made so far?
He certainly is a key figure in all this, because another mistake, one of many mistakes, which has been done by Moscow, was the expectation that he would either flee or agree to sign any kind of agreement which would be imposed on him by Moscow. But he didn't. He is making a very good job, not only in administrating the military. I don't think that he's actually commanding the military. There are professional people who are doing this, but he's very important as a symbol, as a symbol of resistance, who sends very clear messages to all Ukrainians and internationally, who is very eloquent. He is very good in speaking to international and internal audiences, and this is very crucial today. So I think what he's doing is very important.
You already mentioned that at the very beginning, but I'd like to maybe stress that or repeat that. Also that Russia didn't expect Ukraine to provide such a strong resistance to the invasion. And we see lots of news about how Russian military is actually not achieving its goals. But at the same time, if you listen to military experts, they're saying that there is much more things that Russia can actually do to achieve those goals. So the question here is, how do you assess this maybe over optimistic reporting, I would say, on the resistance, or maybe, yeah, any thoughts on that?
I do understand that if you listen to Ukrainian media and probably to some Western media, there is an over-optimism in some estimations. Things are a little bit more serious, a little bit more danger on the ground, and certainly it will demand much more effort and much more time to win for Ukraine in any meaning of the word. I think that for a weaker side in an asymmetric conflict, a win is something different. It's just preserving its own statehood and its own territory. It is complicated. But in my view, I'm not a military expert, but I think that what I see on the ground, that Russians are not moving. They're unable to take any major city, with the exception of Kherson, only because they didn't meet any significant resistance in the south. But all the key cities, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, they are still standing, and Russian forces are just moving along the roads. They are not controlling even territories which are often drawn on the maps as being occupied in converted commas. So I see real problems because there is no progress, and I believe the time is playing against the Russians because of the price they are paying for the war itself, and also economically, politically, diplomatically. And I do know that support for Ukraine is really strong. That there is an open western border, which is open for refugees from Ukraine in one direction and for weapons in another direction. So I assume, given all that Russians are facing real military problems.
Maybe one last question about the numbers that we actually are also getting from the media and from the Ukrainian state agencies. Russians do not report their casualties, Ukrainians do. How trustworthy is this information? What resources or what sources can we trust other than the state reporting?
That's a good question. I also ask it myself. And certainly, I think most of Ukrainians start their mornings by checking the numbers. And you might skip the Russian information because it is closed and most likely it is not real. But Ukrainians provide numbers which, to me personally, also seem a little bit optimistic. So I usually did use them by around 30–40%. I also follow the information provided by the American or British intelligence. They also sometimes do that. So somewhere in the middle lies the real number of casualties in what concerns soldiers. Concerning all the rest, I think that it's better to do the same, to find independent sources of information. Since certainly there are lots of videos and pictures of planes being shot or tanks being also shot in the internet, on social media, but it's very difficult to calculate. For me, it's not so important even the number of casualties, because I'm not expecting that the war will end as long as the final soldier from this 180,000 plus army will die. But the dynamic is more important. How these troops are moving, which cities they control, and what kind of military morale can be observed among Russian soldiers. I think these signs are also a little bit in favor of Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Mykola, for your time, and keep safe.
Thank you.